principle behind a moshel. So what is a moshel? There is what's called an example, and there's what's called a moshel. They're not the same thing. For example, you say add the principle of addition in mathematics, in arithmetic. So you say if you add certain amounts of that, you then have a total. For example, add 1 to 1, what do you get? You have 2. 2 is not a motion. 2 is an example of the process, of the logic of arithmetic. Then there is a moshel. A moshel, and the purpose of a moshel, is when you are expressing a thought, an idea, that you cannot give an example for, because it's not an empirical idea. You cannot demonstrate it. So you give a moshel, and what is the moshel? The moshel is that it's based on the principle that we, unbeknownst to us perhaps, have a certain sense of truth that we never tapped, that in normal daily activities we are oblivious to it.
Certain sense of truth.
We're oblivious to it. So you give a moshel something that hits you and says, oh yeah, I really sense this. This is something beyond empirical proof. I, as a living human being, sense this truth. For example, this is an example, but it's an example already to something that is subtle. We always speak about the fact that the human being stands on 2 feet, which is not logical from an empirical worldly perspective. Do we understand that? The most precarious standard in the world is a human being. A tree stands on one leg, but it's rooted all the way down, tens of feet down into the ground, and it grabs onto the ground. A human being just stands on top of the ground, and he stands on 1 foot, on the tippy toe of 1 foot, and he stands. How does he do that? So again, we cannot empirically show this. But if you talk to the human being and say, you know how you do it. You do it because on the basis and on the force that you are floating upwards. You are really not part of the ground. You're held up by your brain. You're held up by your spirit. Like the famous word of a Meir Yaner. You know the story. Rabbi said, a human being is zugebunden Eugen. Bound. Zugebunden Eugen. Bound upwards. Zugebunden Eugen, whether he knows it or not, most of the time he doesn't. But that is the nature. That is what the human creature is. This is what God created. He put in him a neshama that refuses to essentially to be part of the world. It does everything it needs to do to bring life to the world, but it cannot become part of the world. It's Sugibun Noim. This is what we said last night, that the world would have been totally self-contained, just like the scientists view it, but for the fact that there is a human being in it. Human being came and he disrupted this entire formula. And he came to the animals. That's what the medicine. When the magician came out, came to the animals and said, "What are you doing? You're roaming around. Come on, let's go and acknowledge our Creator." No one ever thought of it. I'll come back to the question, to the capsule in a moment. We spoke about, we went into yesterday, I tried, and I will try harder, to understand the principle of oimek leoimek, to understand the principle of nishmos li nishmos. Now, we understand clearly, chokhmah needs a neshama. Or the goof needs a neshama because the goof cannot live on its own. The goof, if it gets damaged, it's finished. And without a neshama, it would be staying put in one place just like a tree does. The goof needs a neshama in order to allow it to function as a goof. Chochmah needs a neshama. What does a neshama need a neshama for? Nishmos or li nishmos. Okay, please follow this. What in fact is the difference between the goof and the chayes in the goof? As we discussed yesterday and many times before, the goof is a structure, a circumstantial structure. You can look at the goof, and that's the way the scientists look at it. How come we have two hands? We needed two hands, so we developed two hands. It fits very logically. It's very stupid because you don't employ real human intelligence. But if you want to do away with human intelligence, you want to go back to the first 5.5 days of creation and look at it from the perspective of the world itself, that's exactly what happened. The world doesn't provide any other basis for it, except you needed it because the lions were attacking you, so you built two hands. On that basis, we go a little deeper. We say that in fact everything that we experience, that we encounter in the world, has a circumstantial need. You go to work, you don't go to work because you go to work, you go to work because of some other circumstances within the world and context. Everything has some kind of a worldly cause, and it's also to speak within this circumstantial context. Goof is exactly that. It happens to have, for example, 2 feet. 2 feet makes it possible for you to stand, to balance itself, and make it possible to walk. And how do the feet work? Well, they rotate around their bones, and the bones are so structured that they fit into one another, and therefore they're able to both stand and rotate. If you study it, you open up, that's exactly what it is. And this was all developed within the context of the world, of the group. There is not an essential truth to this. Why does a person need feet to walk? Because he has to be able to run away from the lion. There's nothing real about it. The lion or the mouse, I don't know, whoever it is. And some people think that feet are made to run in circles and to beat the other guy. There's no real purpose in it. There's no essential reality to it. And if you look at it from that angle, if you define it exactly at that level, exclusively, then you say like this: if this limb gets injured, it's the end of the story. There's nothing real behind it. You follow what I'm saying? There's no internal imperative that it should be. You throw a rock, and the rock will fly as long as it will fly. Somebody comes, or the rock hits a wall. Will the rock continue to fly? Hits a wall and it will fall. But it was just now flying. The flying was because you threw it. Now that something interfered with its flight. The rock doesn't care to fly. There's nothing in the rock that propels it to fly. So it falls down and doesn't care. That's exactly what happens to the body if it gets injured. Comes on the nefesh, the neshama, the chayes. And the chayes says is in a different category. The chayes is in a different category. It is not reactive, it's not circumstantial. It is real. I want to live. And like we say, I want to be a human being. Not I'm a human being by default. I want to be a human being. I'm jumping the gun, but this is nothing new to us. You know what I'm saying? I'm jumping the steps over. I want to be a human being. Wait. In other words, it's an essential thing. It's not. When we see a person gets embarrassed, so we look at it again through circumstance. He gets embarrassed. So the embarrassment, the way the psychologist will explain, the embarrassment is essentially a feeling that you are inferior to somebody else. Again, circumstantial. In the worldly parameters. So that's still on the goof level, so to speak. So we say, no, there is a nefesh behind it. And the nefesh is a nefesh ha'odam. A nefesh ha'odam, being embarrassed, is essential to it. Because it stands for something. It is not just maintaining an existence. And if it's being embarrassed or insulted, this is something which hits the essential element of what the human being is. Koved Abriyas, as I mentioned many times, is something which is an important principle in Torah. Why? Because Koved Abriyas represents nefesh, and nefesh represents God. There's a truth to this creature. To the extent that Rashi explains, going up the Mizbeach should be on a ramp, not on steps, because when you walk up on steps, you're spreading your legs. And spreading your legs on top of steps is an embarrassment to the steps. And Rashi explains, look at this. These steps do not sense it. They don't have a sense But because they related to a human being, they serve the human purpose, a human value, or godly value. The steps have to be respected. Because if you don't respect the steps, you are embarrassing the human being who is using the steps, and you're embarrassing his creator. This element is inherent in our nefesh. And this element is what comes to the surface. Again, we may not be continuously aware of it. This comes to the surface, for example, when your finger gets cut and the nefesh comes and heals it. It's cut, so cut, who cares? Oh, you cannot do this, and okay, let's learn how to do it without the finger. But the finger, no, the nefesh says, no, I need a perfect body. It's not just functional. It needs to be perfect for my purposes, for higher purposes. Do I have you with me? And here is where we can, with this approach, we can finally try and focus in on nishmosa and nishmosa di nishmosa. Nishmosa is that which gives life to the body. Wherever the neshama is, it has to be perfect. And if it happens to be in the goof has to be perfect, otherwise it's insulting to the neshama. But if the neshama is not in the goof, it's not in the goof. Then he doesn't care whether the goof is whole or not. The neshama is in the goof also circumstantially in order to give life to the goof. Nishmosa li nishmosa goes a step further. And it says, before anything is there, before the goof was ever conceived, I want it to be. It's rooted in the oneness, in the godly oneness. There is not a circumstantial element in this at all.
Why not say that's godliness itself? The source of the soul is Chelak Elokah. The source of the soul is Hashem. So where's...
Yeah. Okay. So
that would seem to imply Nishmata to Nishmata is Hashem himself. Here's the Nishmata.
One second, Hashem himself. It is Hashem himself. That's what we're saying. In other words, it's completely outside of the realm of the circumstantial, of the precarious existence, that one thing helps the other. Nishmosa is not precarious, it's real, but it is also has a ways of explaining its purpose, its function. There's a function, to keep the goof perfect. Not to keep the goof functional, but to keep the goof perfect. But that's a function of the nefesh. Nishmosa, the nishmosa, is at a totally different level. This is like what's said over here. This is the way it is rooted in Atzmos itself. Okay. This nishmosa li nishmosa, you would think it's something remote and okay, Chassidus says that there is such thing, the Zohar says there is such thing, fine. But me, from my perspective, from my life experience, I'm not really touched by it. But we are saying this is not true. This is inherent in the nefesh od, in the neshama od, nefesh od, inherent. And if you take that away, he will not be able to to accept, to orient himself. For example, very simple, going back to our very simple examples. Make a human being walk on 4, not on 2. He can still get around. Walk on 4. Practically speaking, you have not taken away anything. What have you touched over here? You have touched the principle as to who I am. Am I here to be able to walk? Or am I here to be a human being?
Isn't that Nishmasa?
What?
Isn't that Nishmasa?
The actual walking is a nishmat. But if you take it away, the way the reason is demanded that it should come back, that's not nishmat. Like let's say about true. It's imperative. It's a reality itself. A human being stands on 2. He doesn't stand on 2. He stands on 1, the truth is. Because that's how you walk. You walk and stand on 1 foot. The second foot is to be able to propel you further. And how does he stand? He stands just like a top, because he is bound upwards. This isn't a human being. And I said, this is like a mashal to show, not to show, and to sense, bring out in us the sense that there is some kind of reality in us. The reality is to such an extent that if we should be taking away something, we want it back. We can't be without it, even if, practically speaking, nothing is lost. My feet I need in order to be able to move from point A to point B. But if I'm not allowed to walk with my feet, I have to go on my 4s or whatever it is. I don't want to give other examples. On a wheelchair, I'm 4. I cannot take it. I'll need my feet. I'll need to be able to walk on 2. Why? Have you pointed out you're more secure on 4 than on 2? Coming back to the illustration, it's a mashal that should strike us, the illustration of the capsule. We think we live in circumstantial basis. The reason I go to work is because I have to pay rent. There's going to be demands on me. Whether it's demands from outside, from inside, my stomach is going to cry out, whatever it is. So we have to wake ourselves up. See, this wakes us up and says, this is all from the goof perspective. And in the goof itself, you would say there is the chokhmah, and there is the chayas, and there is the oineg. The oineg, that the way it's established in chokhmah. I really want it that way. I really want it. Then there is a nishmosel and nishmosel. It must be this way.
Must be what?
It must be this way. A human being must be a human being. There is no a way to explain what he's missing. He's missing being a human being. What's a human being in the world? What's the point? It's a nishmos of nishmos. It's a godly reality. But the head has to be on top and the feet have to be in the bottom.
Chochmah does not have that sense.
Chochmah does not. Chochmah takes an existing oinek and translates it in guf, in mitzias. And there is right. Chochmah has it, but in a remote manner. It's not mislabish in Chochmah. That's what you say. It's not mislabish in Chochmah. This is why we explained that this is in a different category. Everything that we perceive, even in Chochmah, even in the Oinek Shem, in Islamic Chochmah, we perceive it as this is how it is. Then you go outside of this entire sphere. There is no is. You go into Etzem. There, the terminology is totally different. This is how I want it, period. Our time is almost up, so I want to bring it to a practical thing that you understand, a very profound in Yiddishkeit. We always say that you can find reasons for mitzvahs, a signal, a sigzel, and so forth, all kinds of reasons, even higher than the conventional thing. We can find all reasons, one on top of the other, even real. Even real mitzvahs, reasons. We always say, remember, the real reason for lo signev lo sigzoy is because God said so. What does it sound like? It sounds like the real reason is to be obedient. Please understand from this what we discussed. No, that's not what it is. The obedience is the means by which we get to that. The real reason is because we connected to Hashem. And Hashem wants it that way. Therefore there is a reality in every action of that we do. There's a godly reality in it. And we relate to that reality if you do it because God said so. You're not talking about the subservience element. You're talking about the deepest sense of reality. Way beyond circumstance. This is what we always explain the meaning of Nase v'Nishma. We didn't receive the Torah, they were on the pinnacle of human stature. Where they completely were imbued with this principal truth. What is existence all about? The godly truth. From that I can become a human being also.
Rabbi Paltiel?
Yes, sir. We have to keep track of the time, but speak up. Go ahead.
This sense that you're talking about now, this shmasa, Chochmah does use the word relate to. Chochmah senses this, or it's not sensing. It's not sensible, this thing you're talking about now.
Okay. Now, in Chochmah we're talking about only be mislabish. It's not mislabish in anything. Not even in Chochmah. But sensing it, yes. Not only Chochmah senses it, your foot senses it. This is where everything is equal. And with this, gentlemen, we're going to daven with our mouths, with our hearts, with our brains. I don't know what else. Kol Tov, sei gesund. Have a good day, and we'll meet him tonight, this evening for the Sikh. Kol Tov, sei gesund.